Hello, and welcome to the ParAqua podcast, the science podcast that shines a light on the newest and most interesting research being conducted in the fields of aquatic and marine ecology. My name is Joe Money. I'm a PhD student and the host of this podcast. Today, I will be interviewing Serena Rasconi from the Institute of National Research for Agriculture, Food and the Environment in Thonon-les-Bains in the Alpine region of France. We'll be discussing her research on fungal parasites, sustainability of algal aquaculture, and the benefits and challenges of leading an international research network. Hello, Serena, how are you doing?
Hi, Joe. Good, thank you. Hi, everybody.
What the listeners might not know is me and Serena are actually co-producers of this podcast, so we end up speaking quite a lot, and I've definitely enjoyed our working relationship so far.
It's a very nice idea. Thank you, Joe, for proposing this and taking care of this very nice activity within ParAqua. Thank you.
That's very nice of you to say. So jumping into the questions, Serena, can you give us a quick summary of your education and background, just for the listeners to get to know you a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. I'm Italian. I was born in Milano and graduated from the National University in Milano in natural science. I started studying with my master project, the carbon cycle and the bacteria in Lake Maggiore, which is also an alpine lake in northern of Italy. And then, I moved to France. I was lucky. I got a very interested PhD on the ecology of a group of fungal parasite of phytoplankton chytrids. And I moved then for 2-3 different postdoc in different very, very nice place in Oslo and in Austria at the limnological station of Lund am See, the Wasser cluster, where I got the opportunity to learn a lot and different methods in limnology, molecular biology, and trophic ecology.
That's a very broad range of countries and subjects that you studied. That's very interesting.
Yeah, let's say, well, if you want really a bit the red thread is, a limnology. I'm a limnology. I basically almost studied lakes and the ecology of plankton. I work really with microorganisms. I started, as I say, with bacteria, phytoplankton, a bit of zooplankton, and so let's say these are really a bit the common topics that were developed during my studies.
Yeah, and it sounds like you sort of have a very alpine focus in particular. I mean, you've already mentioned that you went to Austria and Lake Maggiore in the Alps, and right now you're calling from Thonon-les-Bains in the Alpine region of France, right?
Definitely, definitely. And it is true. I mean, the Alps and the peri-alpine lakes are very important ecosystem for Europe, providing fresh water, providing services. And Norway is also a very nice country. There are very nice lakes. But definitely the Alps are a very nice and interesting environment for limnologists.
Yeah, there's definitely other regions I can think that maybe less scenic, maybe less beautiful as the Alps. You picked a good one, I think.
Like is beautiful, I would say, but no, definitely. And I mean, it's interesting also to work at the middle latitude, working with the seasonal change and different things. That's true. I never got the opportunity to work, for example, on extreme environment on the tropics or
Yeah, but I mean, I think the Alps also provide quite a nice axis of latitude and climate and stuff like that. So I can understand why it's a really interesting area to study, in particular the lakes in that area.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, as I say, I studied natural science, so I'm not a pure biologist. So it is certainly interesting on a point of view also of a more let's say, environment-wise point of view on the system. Of course, the mountains and, well, the catchment area are very important element in the Alpine region, especially considering two lakes, what is, something that it's important to take into account. And it's very enjoyable to do some field work in this environment.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, your background in natural science must give you a sort of systems-based view of these things, which I think we're going to touch on a bit later, but really important nonetheless. Speaking of lakes and limnology, how did you discover that you enjoyed working in the fields of aquatic ecology, and why was this area of biology particularly important to you?
Yeah, as I say, well, I grew up in Milano. It's a big city. There is a lot, of course, to see and discover. But nature is probably not the main thing that is present there. But I always had the chance to visit the environment around. And well, it is true the Alps are not far away from Milano, and the peri-alpine lakes. So I was visiting a lot Lake Maggiore, and that's the reason why I tried also to go there for my studies, because I immediately had the feeling that I was better in on the lakeshore or on the forest surrounding the lake than in the city. I've always been interested in understanding how life interact with the environment, and what are really the drivers and the factor that govern a bit let's say the rules of the life, and how organism as I say can interact, and as I say also this seasonal change, this regular cycle that at the middle latitude happens so regularly, because every year we see season, and every year it's always amazing to discover what happened in spring and what happened in winter. So these are really things that fascinated me when I was young, and I decided that if I could keep learning about ecosystem, that would be make me more interested and happy about my studies.
I mean, a lot of what you're saying resonates with me as a biologist myself. And I think there's a lot of, one of the things you said that really, that I agree with, and probably I share, is that the sort of interaction between different ecosystems, you can see so much in lakes and rivers, can't you? Because there's just so much boundary between, one aquatic ecosystem and a terrestrial ecosystem, and how these two things influence each other, I find very interesting as well. So diving a little bit deeper into your research, your current research is focused on the ecology of aquatic fungal parasites. Now, for our listeners who aren't familiar with this specialized area of biology, could you explain the role that fungal parasites play in aquatic ecosystems? Now, I've talked to people before about my work, and in this area, I've also done a bit of research, and fungal aquatic parasites, those are three words that don't always get lumped together in public consciousness. So if you could explain a little bit about it, that would be really interesting, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, it is true that fungi are not mainly studied in lakes, and parasitism is not the main biotic interaction that has got attention, let's say, in the past, because now things are changing also thanks to the new technologies, because as I mentioned, always for most of my research worked with very small organisms, so that pose a bit of challenge also for the methodology for correct observation. Actually, the fungal parasites were known since already, at least if not the beginning of the last century, I would say the 50s, the 60s was the work of Hilda Kanter that started describing some organisms that she was observing growing on the phytoplankton. But as I say, it's thanks to the new technology that we could really understand that these organisms belong to the group of fungi, or at least most of them, not all the phytoplankton and algal parasite, because also macroalgae have parasite. But yeah, as I said, the new technology brought light on this organism, and was possible, to clarify a bit better the phylogeny and the characteristic of this organism. And indeed, parasites are quite important organisms, not only in water, not only when they are parasite of algae. And it is true that parasite gets a lot of attention when they are little and dangerous for humans, or resources for humans, like, for example, food or livestock. These are all hot topics. So the economic interest, of course, in studying this organism is very important. Coming a bit more to the aquatic environment, and let's say the ecological importance of this organism, it's first of all, as I say, it's from the point of view of the phytoplankton population, can be very important drivers. This parasite can be very virulent and can decimate entire population, or when they are specific, they can really target species of phytoplankton that maybe at the moment is even predominant. So they can really also modulate, if you want, a bit the dynamic of the different species of the phytoplankton in the environment. They are very important from an evolutionary point of view. They can really promote the genetic diversity on one side, as I say, because they can suppress some organisms that are dominant and allows other organisms to proliferate at that moment. But also for what is the eco-evolutionary dynamic parasite, well, not only for phytoplankton in lakes, but in general, parasites are a very important force for what is, let's say, this dynamics between host and parasites. So they really allow the evolutionary change in population. For what are specifically the phytoplankton parasite, fungal aquatic fungi are what are called the zoosporic fungi. They have a dissemination life stage, which is a spore, can swim, so it's definitely this an adaptation to the aquatic environment. But what is important, let's say, on the ecosystem point of view, is that this spore, it's small and can be very easily grazed by other organisms, up to the phytoplankton, the ciliate, the rotifers, and up to the crustacean phytoplankton. So it's a veritable resource for other organisms. So this parasite can be also very important, as involved in trophic link, provide resources, be also an alternative link when, for example, there are phytoplankton species that are not edible because they are too big or even toxic in case of phytoplankton bloom. So as we can see, there are different aspects of the parasitism that make this organism important also in lake environments.
Yeah, I think that's really, really interesting stuff. And I think one of the things that you touched on is that parasites have such a sort of a scary reputation, I guess, in our world. Like, they have bad economic effects, they have bad effects on our health. But actually, the things that you've just been talking about, they can regulate ecosystems, they can promote active grazing, they can sort of modulate and almost improve the biodiversity and prevent monocultures in lakes. That actually these are tools that we can use to remediate lakes that have been polluted by us, that have been basically made eutrophic by us. And actually, I think these very, very small parasites that are funguses that grow on these small filaments of phytoplankton and cyanobacteria, they can be really powerful tools for us in our even if you want to think even more broadly in fighting climate change, because lakes have a big regulating effect on the climate locally and globally. And you're right that these parasites could there's definitely a lot of worth that we could find in researching more of them, I think, for sure.
Yeah, and an aspect that maybe I didn't address in my answer is also, these are fungal parasites. So as I said in the beginning, fungi are not very much studied in lakes, but we know, for example, in terrestrial environment, fungi have a very important symbiosis with plants. They have a very important interaction with organisms, notably on the point of view of the recycling of the nutrients. So this is something that it's started to get a bit on the momentum and start to be really something important that we start to be studied is really the importance of the interaction among different organisms. So I think this is something that will also come. What is the importance of this association, fungi, algae? If fungi really can have also in the aquatic environment this important role of recycling nutrients. And here we are talking about parasites. So of course they are detrimental for the host, but as I said, they can be important resources for some other organisms in the ecosystem. So this a bit large point of view can be important, as I say, to take into account that fungi are also quite particular organism with particular characteristic that, as I say, in lakes have been a bit overlooked. So I think this is also an interesting aspect that deserve to be studied.
Yeah, and that brings me on perfectly to my next question, which is, broadly speaking, why is it important to study aquatic fungal parasites, and how does this research into the area impact the lives of the general public? I mean, we've touched upon it broadly, but how can we sort of relate it to local causes, to lake health, and even tourism, things like that? These things can have a big effect, I think.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, studying how lakes means understand how they work, and this is super important. Because bring us to understand their functioning and how they can provide also the fundamental services that lakes provide to humans. Well, first of all, drinking water, food. So, as I mentioned before, this parasite can be very important also for what is the food web, the recycling, and providing reserves to the upper trophic level. So this is definitely one thing, and is very important. Understanding the functioning of the ecosystem, as I say, brought us to protect us. And now we know also that some of our ecosystem were not, let's say, protected enough. So they need also some action. They need to be restored. We need really some concrete decision now. Well, not all the lakes, fortunately, needs a strong action, but some need. And so it will be important to understand, of course, as much as possible, the functioning of the ecosystem, because, as I say, this means being able to protect and restore them better. Another important aspect is mainly related to the target of this parasite, is the host, which are algae and microalgae, phytoplankton, but also, as I mentioned before, macroalgae are target of parasite. And we know that today algae and the production of the algal biomass, it's a very important topic. Is getting momentum in the entire Europe. It can really constitute the future. It can really constitute an alternative resource which is sustainable, which can grow, let's say, more or less easily. This, of course, it depends a bit on the need, because the biomass algae can be used for very different purposes, from the mass culture for providing, well, fuel, even food, to a very, let's say, precise and target production of high value molecules. But let's say, broadly speaking, the algal biomass production is getting very promising, and understanding which are the factors that can harm and this production, that can pose risk for good production, as I say, in both sense, either on the mass production for fuel, or well, even more on the very let's say, the need of producing pharmaceutical and high valuable molecule of very pure and clean culture. So when we think about contamination and factor that can pose a risk for the production, or even the development of the technologies and the facilities that can allows us to produce this resource, well, we understand that it's important to understand which are the factors that are linked, as I say, to the risk of the production of this new resource.
Yeah, going back to our earlier point, the effect of parasites on agriculture and health, and these are the things that people commonly think of when they think of parasites and funguses. But actually, as you said, algae production is becoming a really big industry in itself, not just for food, not just for livestock feed, not just for pharmaceuticals, but like all of those different areas are going to have different regulations and different needs. So understanding what is going to be preying on the algae is completely necessary. So I completely understand what you're saying there. So going a bit more broadly speaking, I'd just like to highlight that not only are you a researcher at the Institute of National Research for Agriculture, Food and the Environment in France, but you're also the chair of the ParAqua Action Group. So just speaking about organization in science, really, what has this experience taught you about the relevance and need for international cooperation within any field of scientific study?
Yeah, well, I would say sharing knowledge, experience, and discussing with people, expert, is really the driving force of learning and improving, and it's really something extremely. Of course, there is something extremely fundamental about, as I say, knowledge sharing, and this is, of course, it's important to be in a network, or to be connected with people, because this is how it happens. Of course, we can read and listening to podcasts and watching training video, but it's not the same, what I want to say. I mean, it's like we are doing now. It's very enjoyable to have a conversation and to discuss and share. So, of course, cooperation comes from that, comes from a bit, getting in contact to people, and finding also common interest, and the idea of progressing together. Of course, it's something that is extremely powerful and important. And as you mentioned, the Action ParAqua really has the vocation to create links among people, and as we say, especially we're focusing on parasite of algae. So the idea of the action was really to connect scientists and people that has the need to acquire knowledge on what can be the contaminants and the factor that can pose risk for the algal production. So this, let's say, was a bit the main idea of this action, and we find out that actually is it's quite important to connect these two words also, because of course, like for everything, when you have knowledge and also specific and deep knowledge on some topic, it is important that this knowledge then can be applied for some purpose that is not only the knowledge sharing, but yeah, as we say in this case, the algal production. So cooperation is only important for that, because it's about sharing, but it's also about funding important application and way forward for applying this knowledge. An important, very important aspect that maybe we can mention now, which is a bit broader, and it's for international cooperation, but as I say, it's a bit more for every kind of knowledge, is also, as I say, sharing and sharing openly. Today is becoming clear that opening resources, it's really the key to empower people and to bring things forward. So this idea that is now becoming important of open sharing, open resource, open science, it's something very important, and it's something that I strongly believe on. I can understand that there is still a bit of reticence, that the system needs to be more promoted, that people needs to acquire more knowledge on how this works. But I think it's something that will really become important in the future, and I really hope that everybody will adopt a system like this, because of course it's also the importance of keeping things open, that everybody can participate and believe in this way of sharing.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting way of viewing it. I think we've already talked about your very international background. You've spent a lot of time in different countries at different research institutes, and I'm sure that informs your sort of view on these things. And yeah, I have to say I completely agree. There's a really interesting phrase that I think we used on my project when we were applying for funding, which is like added value, which is how much added value you get from these international corporations. And I think it's obviously like it's not always the point of your research, but having that international network gives you a lot of added value. I think you can make connections, you can work with colleagues, and not to get too starry-eyed about science, but in the history of science, the communication was one of the things that was really slowing things down. Like you go back to even Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace, those two people were working on the same thing, and they just didn't have the communication networks that we have today. And one of the reasons I think for the sort of the modern synthesis of science and biology in particular is that we can communicate so well. And so I think there's real value in leading and also joining one of these networks. So yeah, I'd just like to extend the thank you from everyone at ParAqua for being such a good chair.
Yeah, well, thank you. And coming back, a bit to this topic of the open access resources and the open science, which is something that, yeah, as I say, I see very promising, and yeah, I try to promote a lot, because as I say, it's something in which I strongly believe, and it's really important. And a very important point also, as you mentioned, communication is also this, let's say, a new way of sharing your knowledge, and through new type of publication. Now, I mean, we are really used of the classical scientific papers, and of course, I mean, we all love books and libraries and this very mystic place. But science and knowledge now, it's shared also through different, let's say, format and way also. Like now it's possible to publish scripts, it's possible to publish data set, to share really knowledge that allows to build other knowledge that allows people to learn from what you already did, what you already know, and from that to work on. We are working now on this database to create a tool that will be open access and that we believe it will be important for the community because it will allow people also to get the knowledge that they need to go forward and build their own knowledge for their own need. Another point, for example, coming back to the classic publication, is this new way of reviewing article, the open review that happens directly on the platform where the author can publish their work. Well, for example, now in Europe is getting very important the Open Research Europe platform, which is a platform for publishing that allows scientists and researchers that have Horizon Europe project to directly publish their work and have a direct dialogue with their reviewer, reading their work, making comments and helping them to improve. So everything also thanks to the new technology is getting more direct. People can really interact in a more fluent and constructive way. And so I see a lot of barriers going down at the moment, a lot of dynamism, and I think it's very exciting to see this change and be a bit there at this moment.
Yeah, and you're completely right. The communication methods are there, but there's always going to be barriers that maybe are worth campaigning to break down. And I think networks like this do a really good job of breaking down these barriers in science, in making open access a priority. Like you mentioned, our database that we're working on. I think things like that only have good benefits, and we've always got to campaign and sort of fight for the right to be able to have open access to knowledge and things that can benefit everyone. So yeah, I completely agree with you. And so we've just talked quite well about the benefits of these international action groups such as ParAqua. So final question, if anyone was interested in joining ParAqua or other international scientific action groups, can you recommend any ways to get involved or find out more about these things?
Yeah, well, as I say, ParAqua is also, of course, open to everybody that has an interest to join the network. The action is very welcome to join. It's possible to apply. The link is on the ParAqua website. You can search on whatever search engine on the internet, ParAqua-COST. COST is the European Cooperation in Science and Technology. Is the program, the funding program that support us and our action. So yeah, as I say, just search on internet ParAqua COST, and it will be easier to find. This podcast will be in any case diffused on our platform on social media, so they will be associated also to the link to the podcast, the links to get to our website and to join us. So if you are listening this podcast, you probably will have some facility and opportunity to find us on the net.
Yeah, and whatever platform you're listening to this on, I'm sure in the description we'll have the relevant links for how you can not just join ParAqua, but maybe look into other networks through cost action.
Definitely. Cost actions are really a lot of different topics, and as I say, everybody is free to join. They also of course have a website, cost.eu, where you can find the entire catalog of the action, and as I say, everybody is free to join the other action. All action are open, and I'm sure that there are a lot of of chairs out there that they would be more than happy to talk about what they are doing and welcome interested people. I'm also, of course, available. My name is on the description of the podcast. My email address is on the ParAqua website. So definitely feel free to contact me if you would like some more information or just a chat on how we can work together on this topic.
And the same goes for the whole of ParAqua. I think I can speak on behalf of all of our members, where if you want to get involved, if you want to reach out to someone who's doing research that you're interested in, just go for it. I think it's always worth an email, always worth finding out. So I think all that remains to be said is thanks for joining us, Serena. It's been lovely having you on.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks everybody for listening. It was a pleasure and a very nice chat.
The ParAqua podcast was funded by COST, the European Cooperation in Science and Technology, and is a product of the ParAqua Action Group. If you are interested in joining an action group or just want to know more, please go to www.ParAqua-COST.eu or follow the link in the episode description. The podcast is produced by myself and Serena Rasconi, and the Science Communication Coordinator is Gavrilović. Once again, thanks for listening, and see you next time on the ParAqua podcast.